Hello and welcome back to another Python tutorial. We're continuing our series on the TD Ameritrade API, and so we've already had two videos that have kind of been released that covered the topic, at least at a high level. The first video was talking about certain endpoints where we didn't have to authenticate ourselves, so this is something where we didn't have to get an access token in order to use it. And then I also released a video that described the fundamentals necessary in order to fill out a form and submitting that form using a library called Splinter. Splinter is a web browser automation library that sits on top of Selenium. And so Selenium is also another library that is used for browser automation, but Splinter allows you to do the same things that you would normally do in Selenium, but with fewer lines of code. And so what we're going to do in today's video is, now that we have an understanding of the API, we've created an account, we've registered an app, we've now seen how to make requests using the API. We also know how to use Selenium and Splinter in order to go out and fill out a form and request a web page. We are now going to see how we can authenticate ourselves inside of this API. Now, to give you some background knowledge, if you actually go to the TD Ameritrade documentation, you'll actually see some processes that you have to do in order to authenticate yourself. And so I'm going to jump to that documentation really quickly. If you go to the Getting Started content, you'll see right here, there's some information that basically tells you how to set up your account and everything like that. So creating a developer account, we've already been through this. We've talked about registering an app, and we also saw how to navigate the documentation for different things. And then we also did some requests that didn't require authentication. It does give you some notes about how it's limited, and then it talks about unauthenticated request and authenticated request. When I was reading this, it sounded like at some point all of the requests will have to be authenticated at some point. I don't know when that is, but it kind of, at least from what I was reading, was like, okay, at some point we're going to have to authenticate ourselves even if we don't want to. Now, to authenticate ourselves, we first have to get an access token, and then we pass that access token on when we make certain requests. And so if you go here to the far right side, you'll see something called the Simple Authentication Guide. And this basically walks you through how to authenticate yourself. And all we're really doing is we're going to be constructing a URL, one that looks very similar to this one. We're going to go request that URL. It's going to bring up a page that we have to provide our account number and our password that is associated with our account number. Once we do that, it will take us to another page where we basically have to accept the terms and conditions like anything we use. And then after that one, a new 404 page will come up. So basically it will show an error. But inside that 404 page at the URL, so the part right here, there will be a URL that has a section that contains a code. And that code, we're going to parse it, and we're going to take it and request it. Well, not request it. We're going to parse it and then send it along in another endpoint to go and get our access token. So this is a multi-part step process, but ideally, we can automate the majority of it using Splinter and using Python. And the reason why is, if we want to keep authenticating ourselves, we don't want to have to kind of make this a manual process. We rather just have Python do it for us. And so they do provide some information about these particular tokens. They talk about a refresh token, that you can use it for 90 days to request an access token and allow you to authenticate it without needing a server. So what you'll notice is there's actually when we request our access token, there is a refresh token that we can use to get a new access token. So in other words, we don't have to authenticate ourselves. We can pass through that refresh token and it will give us a new access token. But after 90 days, we can no longer use that refresh token. We have to authenticate ourselves again. So there's different ways to do it, but at this point, let's just get to the part of getting our access token. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into my Jupyter notebook. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to import our libraries like we've done in all of our other videos. The first one that we're going to be importing is called time. We're going to have to pause our script for like a second just to make sure the page loads. And so we're going to be using the time library in order to do that. We will also have to parse the URL that comes back to us. And so we're going to be using the URL lib in order to do that. And also with the URL lib, we get access to a decoder. So it can decode that URL that was sent back to us because it might not be in the format that we need it. So the URL lib will help us decode that. We're going to have to make requests. So we're going to import our request library. And then finally, we're going to import from Splinter our browser object. So we're going to from Splinter, we're going to import browser. And so this is going to be the browser that we're going to be controlling with Splinter and the Chrome driver in order to go to our URL and fill out the form. And then I also have a config file that contains my client ID, so my API key, my password, and my account number. So I want to keep that stuff private. So I'm going to import it from a config file. So I'm going to do Control Enter. We've now imported our libraries. I also have a section here. This is very familiar if you saw the Splinter video. Just as a note, if you haven't seen that video, you need to watch it before you do this particular video, because I will not be going through all the details of how to use it. Okay, and then what we're also going to be doing is, now that we have our basically our path to our Chrome driver, we're going to now create a new instance of our Chrome browser. And so we're going to pass through our executable path, and then we're going to we're going to make sure that its headless is set to false because I want to see that browser. So headless equal false means I can see the browser. If it's set to true, I cannot see that browser. And then I have to specify I want to use Chrome because by default we use Firefox. So just keep that in mind. So again, define the path, create a new instance of the browser. If I do this, I now have a new browser right down here. Looks good, nothing there because we haven't requested anything. So let's get to the fun part, build the URL and request it. So first thing is define the components of the URL. The first one is the method we're going to be using, the HTTP method. And so we're going to be using get. We're going to be going to get some information, and we're expecting some information to be sent back to us. And then we're going to define our URL. It's going to be https://authentication TD Ameritrade and .com/authentication. And then we're just going to pass through our question mark. I'm going to double check that this is spelt correctly. TD Ameritrade. Okay, it looks fine. Okay, and then we're going to define our payload. So our payload is going to be the parameters that we send along in our request. And so again, if you go here, the documentation does expect a response type, a redirect URI, and a client ID. Now, the redirect URI, you set that up when you create your account. So that's just the one that you set up. I used a localhost as my redirect URI, so I'm just going to pass that one through. And so again, we're stored in a dictionary where the key is the parameter name. So in this case, response type, and then the value is the parameter for that that parameter type. And then we're going to be doing a redirect_URI. This one is http://localhost/test. And then we're going to have a client ID. And then that one will equal our client code. And so what I'm going to do first is, before I send this, I am going to define my client code, because in its simple format right now, it will not work. And so what it's going to do is it's going to equal my client ID plus, because it's a string, so we're doing concatenation, we're going to be adding @AMER dot OAUTHAP. So this is our client code. Think of it basically as your API key with this little section attached on to the end of it. And that is what it is expecting for your client ID. So we have a response type, which is the code. We have a redirect URI, which is just the redirect URI that you define when you create the account. In this case, I did it as a local host and I gave it the name test. And then I have a client ID. Okay, so now we're gonna build the URL. And so we're gonna call it something, I don't know, built URL, something like that. And we'll give it request dot the request object method. So we're going to pass through the method, we're going to pass through the URL, and we're going to define our parameters as the payload, just like that. And then we're going to call the prepare method. And so this will build our URL. So again, we go into our request library, we'll call a request object, method, URL, our payload, and we prepare it. And then once we've done that, we'll simply have our built URL equal built URL.URL property. And there we go. So now that we've done that, we can go to our URL. And so that basically just means calling our browser object. We call the visit method, and then we pass through our built URL. Hopefully there were no issues. Looks good. So it took us there, and now we would have to fill out this form. Now, at first glance, you're like, well, how do I know what it is? If you right click and do inspect, you can go here where we can go to the console where we can inspect our elements. If you go here and you select an element in the page to inspect it, when you highlight over it, it will automatically jump you to that code. So I need the input box. In this case, it's got an ID username right down here. So I'm going to use that. So I'm going to find it by its ID. I'm going to find the password, which has an ID of password. And then I'm going to find the accept button and click it. This one again has an ID of accept. Once I find it by the ID, let's click it. So I'm going to close that for a second. Well, I'm not closing it, but I'm just minimizing it. So what we're going to do is we're going to find those elements, and then we're going to pass through our password and our account number. So we'll define a new payload dictionary. So define the elements to pass through to the form. I'm going to give ourselves some space. We'll call it payload equals a dictionary. The first one is username. That will equal our username. I know, shocking, right? And then our next one will be password, and that one will equal our password. Again, I've defined that up here in my config file. I'm just importing these variables. Okay, now that I've done that, fill out each element in the form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call my browser object. I'm going to do the find by ID method because I'm looking by the ID. We'll find the username, so the element that has username. I'll find the first one that I find. I'll call the fill method. I'll take my payload dictionary and pass through the username key to return my username value. I'm going to copy this one. And I'm going to do almost identical. I'm just going to change some stuff. Instead of doing the username, I'm going to be doing the password. And then here, instead of using the username, I'm going to do the password. I'm going to do one final one. In this example, I'm looking for the accept button. And here I'm not filling it out. I'm just clicking it. So I'm going to call the click method. So I'm filling out these two, and I'm clicking this one. So far, so good. And then another window will pop up, and we'll see that in a second. Oh, I might have to close it and run it again. Sometimes it does that. Come on. There we go. Oh, well, that's probably why. It looks like I didn't do something right. What did I not do? Oh, account number. My bad. It's not username. It's my account number. Apologies about that. Let's try it again. I might have to just close it and run it again. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so now it takes us to the second page, and now we have to click this button. And so if I go here, you will see again it has an ID of accept. So really I can just copy this one again. So here I am clicking to accept terms and conditions, or whatever it is, or I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Okay, and then after that, it will take us to a new page. I like to give it a second, so give it a second to load, even though we're not loading anything. So I'm going to call my time library, and I'm going to call my sleep method, and pass through 1 to say sleep for 1 second. And then I'm going to grab the URL that is on that new browser. And then I'm going to call my browser object, and then just call the URL property. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this again. Hopefully it doesn't take super long to load. It looked like it might, or it could be the fact that my internet is not exactly working. We'll give it a second. I didn't think it would crap out on me like that. I mean, I know my phone works, so. Okay, so let me try this one. Okay, so now it's loading. Sorry, again, I didn't think my Wi-Fi would crap out at me like that. Okay, so anywho, it comes back with this little URL. Now we want this little section. So we want everything after this part right here. It's a really long code, so don't try to copy and paste it. It's not going to be pretty. I'm just going to tell you that right now. So what we'll do is we will grab the URL and parse it. And so we'll store it in a new variable. We'll call it parse URL. That will equal our URL lib. We will call our parse method, and then we will call our unquote method, and then we will call our new URL. We will do a split. We will say find a split on code equals, and then we want the element after that, so 1. And then from here, we can just close the browser, and that will just mean call our browser object and call the quit method. And then if you want to see that URL, you can see it like this. Funny story though, actually. I'm beginning to think somebody doesn't want me to make this video because yesterday I couldn't get in a good rhythm with this video if my life depended on it. And like now today, the Wi-Fi goes down. It's like, I don't know if this is a sign or not, but I feel like it's telling me not to make this video. I don't know. It's just weird. Okay, so let's see it again. Let's see what it comes back with. Again. Okay, so you get back this whole freaking thing. Again, I called the unquote method because when you take this in, it would look different if we didn't decode it, basically. So now this is our code. This is our code that we're going to pass through in our new request. That's really what we were trying to do. So this entire process was to get this code right here. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert a cell below, and we're going to go and authenticate ourselves. So we're going to go use the authentication endpoint. Now, if you go back to here and you click the developer TD Ameritrade.com Authentication API, it will take you to an endpoint where you can practice this. And so this is the endpoint that we need. And then these are the parameters that you would need to, pass through if you want to use this API. And so these are all the parameters. And then this is kind of what it's going to send back to us. And these are the error codes. So I'm going to take this endpoint, I'm going to put it into my Jupyter notebook, and I'm going to define it as the endpoint. So I'm going to define the endpoint that will equal the URL that I define here. And I want it to be the raw one. And from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define the headers, because it does actually expect headers in this one. This one I will define as my headers. It will be a dictionary where the key is content-type. And then the parameter will be and don't ask me why, application / x-ww.form URL encoded, just like that. Okay, so now that we defined the headers, we need to define the payload. Define the payload. This will be a new dictionary called payload, and it will have a key called grant type, which will simply equal authorization code parameter, and then this one will be access type, and this will be offline. And then we have code. Well, that's just the URL that we parsed up above, so parse URL. Oh, geez. And then we have, what is it? Client ID. Well, in this case, it's actually just our client ID. We don't need the client code in this example, so we don't need this part at the end. We just need the client ID. And then next, we have, what is it? The redirect URI, which is simply the http://localhost/test. Okay, and once you've done that, we can use a post method to post the data, and then we will get some information sent back to us. So we will post the data to get the token. So this is a post method. This is not a get method. And we will call it authentication reply. We will call our request library, and then we will call post. And then we will pass through the URL, the headers equals headers. So URL headers. And then we will pass through the data, which is equal to the payload. So we have our headers, our payload, and our URL. We will get some stuff back. We will need to decode that stuff. It will come back to us in a JSON string. Convert JSON string to dictionary. That means taking that, basically that stuff, calling authentication reply, and then calling the JSON property. Well, I'll just store it in a decoded content. And then we will just decode it. Perfect. Keep in mind, you can only make this request once, or else this code will basically become invalid. So I am going to double check that everything is right. Application, XWW form, URL encoded, authorization code, that's the grant type. We have the access type, which is offline. We have our code. We have our client ID. We have our redirect URI. I think that is everything. Headers, data. Here we go. Okay, cool. So I'm going to insert a cell below. I don't think I called that right. Oh, where is it? Oh, no. Let me do this. We'll just get a new code. I think I messed that section up. I didn't put the JSON function like I should have. Oh, well, it probably would help if I'll open up the browser, and then we will go through this process. It will do everything for us. This is the nice thing about automation. Now it just magically does it for us. Okay. So we got our code. That's awesome. Okay, so then we get back this little thing. This is our decoded content with our access token, and then we get a refresh token. We get when it expires, when the refresh token expires, and then the token type, which is bearer. So with that being said, that actually finishes this video. I am so glad it is done with. This is like my 4th time trying to do this video. Told you last time. I tried doing it yesterday and it was just like could not get in the rhythm. Things were just breaking, not fun. And then today, of course, the Wi-Fi goes down when, of course, I'm recording. So that just is naturally how it goes. So if you have any questions about kind of what we did in this video, please put them down in the comments below. I know there might have been a couple steps, but again, really just look at it like this. You're constructing a URL. You're requesting that URL. You're going to fill out the form that pops up. You're going to click the buttons that need to be clicked. You're then going to take the URL that you finally arrive at. You're going to parse it so that way you can get your code. You're going to take that code, use it in another endpoint to get an access token. And then once you have that access token, you can now start making authenticated requests. And so that's what we're going to cover in our next video. We're going to see how to make authenticated requests to do like the accounts endpoint and things along that nature. So that's kind of what is planning to come up down the road. Also, if you could, please make sure to like the video. We appreciate the support. We want to make sure that people can find it and things along that nature. And if you're not already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you get regular updates as we release new videos. So thank you again for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next video.